So I'm also a Little League baseball coach, and I'm missing 2 games today because I knew how important this gathering was. So read behind, we often don't read what's up on the stage, reclaiming the heart of our humanity. Powerful thing about an assembly like this is not only to celebrate our diversity, which we should, what if this kind of gathering could get to the heart of the questions that we must address? So, why is income inequality a plenary session at the Parliament of World Religions? Plenary session. Surely it's an economic issue, as our systems structure wealth toward those at the top. It's no accident, it's structured that way. Clearly, it's a political issue, as wealth and the wealthy then shape and control our politics, the votes, and the bodies. However, listen carefully here, however, if you believe that every human being is made in the image of God, Imago Dei, if you believe that every individual statistic in the economy is a child of God, if you believe that loving our neighbor as ourselves follows directly after loving God in all of our traditions, and no matter your sense or notion of God, if you're from a tradition that says we here are all brothers and sisters tied together, then income inequality is a spiritual issue, a moral issue, and a religious test of our belief. You might know the story of the Good Samaritan. The lawyer asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, what you don't know is the lawyer in the story was a Washington lawyer. I know that tone of voice. It wasn't, "Who is my neighbor? How can I help?" It was, "Okay, all right, just who is my neighbor? And how can I get out of this?" Here's a man who's been robbed and mugged by the side of the road. We could say those robbed and mugged by a global economy. And the religious leaders pass him by, and here comes somebody else, a good Samaritan from a different race, ethnicity, culture, and he stops to risk his resources, his security, and his time to lift this robbed man up to a new life. I want to say, because I am here in this place and we are here, that we must address the core inequality of American life, showed to us by 9 African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina, Mother Emanuel Church, shot and killed in a basement of their sacred space while having a prayer meeting, demonstrating that in America, still, if you are a black man or woman or child, there is no safe place for you in America. And until we address as white Americans that inequality, we will have failed our religious test. Until white parents are as concerned about the talk that black parents have with every one of their sons and daughters about how to behave in the presence of a policeman with a gun, we will have failed our obligation as a neighbor. And to my Christian friends, let me say this clearly: if white Christians were more Christian than white, black parents would fear less for their children. I just finished a book called America's Original Sin, against our indigenous people and African slaves, and I say in the book that repentance in our traditions does not mean saying you're sorry. It means turning around and going in a whole different direction. How do we do that? So I want to start with some good news. Here's a story the media doesn't like to tell. Nicholas Kristof, a couple weeks ago, who talks about global poverty all the time, told us that in the last 20 years, movements like we have been a part of have cut global poverty in half in 20 years. That's good news they don't want to tell you because they want to tell you there's nothing we can do. Bono says this is the greatest story left untold. Now we have girls reading books all over the world, and girls reading books is a threat to men who have weapons. Because we had these Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, to cut poverty in half in 15 years. And now at the UN, just a few weeks ago, we agreed, many nations, on sustainable development goals, now to finish the job and end extreme poverty by 2030. And the people who know say, for the first time in history, that is possible. And what else they don't tell you is when we reduce poverty, inequality is reduced as well. And so it's time for us to talk about the kind of equity, justice, and fairness that our faith requires of us. Francis addressed the Congress, but he also addressed the World Economic Forum a year and a half ago at Davos. First night, a letter was read, and Francis said this. To all the CEOs, he said, wealth should serve humanity and not rule it. You could have heard a pin drop in the room. I believe we can address inequality by focusing on three central core issues to all of our traditions. 1, human dignity. 2, the common good. And 3, stewardship. Human dignity, the common good, and stewardship. Now, she said I was an evangelical, so I've got to end with a text. It was the text that brought me out of the student movement to my Christian faith. The 25th chapter of Matthew, Jesus says, I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And they all said, Lord, when do we see you? Hungry, thirsty, naked, stranger, sick, and in prison. And he said, truly, I tell you, whatever you did to one of these who are members of my family, you did to me. That text is a religious test of a moral economy. Not a world created for the wealthy, but how the vulnerable and the marginal are treated is the test of a global economy. That's our test. And that test is rising up from the bottom. It's a text that makes sure those who are included know their test is those who are excluded. That's our test. So now the MDGs, or the new SDGs, say this. By 2030, we're going to eliminate extreme poverty from the world. And we should also add, eliminate shameful poverty in the richest country in the world. That's a goal worthy of a world parliament of religion.